The sound that shattered my world wasn't a scream, it was my granddaughter's whisper. I was standing near a marble pillar in the Grand Oak Ballroom, watching the soft lights glint off the crystal glasses, my heart swelling with a quiet pride. I had done this. Every silk tablecloth, every delicate canapé, every pink rose in the towering centerpieces was a testament to my love for Sophie. Then I saw her lean in toward her friends, a circle of girls in dresses that cost more than my monthly mortgage. Her eyes flickered towards me for a barest second, a flash of irritation crossing her perfectly made-up face. "Just ignore her," Sophie murmured, the sound barely audible over the string quartet. "She's a nobody." A nobody. The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. A nobody who had just last week calmly transferred $15,000 from my investment account to the hotel's event coordinator to make this very night happen. For a moment the air left my lungs. I saw her friend Madison's eyes scan my simple but elegant navy dress. A dress my late husband Arthur had always loved, and a small, cruel smirk played on her lips. Sophie didn't even look at me again. She simply turned her back, a gesture of dismissal so complete, so absolute, that it left me standing utterly alone in the middle of a crowded room. I smiled, a tight, brittle thing that felt like it might crack my face. I picked up my small clutch from the table, smoothed down my dress, and walked out of the ballroom. The cheerful music followed me out into the cool night air, a mocking soundtrack to my heartbreak. But as I sat in my modest car parked between a brand-new Mercedes and a Porsche, the profound hurt began to curdle, hardening into something else. Something cold, clear, and unbendable. She didn't know it, but Sophie had just given her grandmother a lesson in what it truly means to be a nobody. And I, in turn, was about to teach her what it costs to lose your everything. 7 years ago, when my husband Arthur died of a sudden aneurysm, my world shrank to the four walls of our small Oak Haven apartment. He had been a brilliant accountant, a man who found a quiet beauty in numbers, and he had always handled our finances. I was left at 65 with a life insurance payout of $180,000 and his pension rollover of $60,000, terrified of outliving the last tangible pieces of the life we had built. For the first year, I did nothing, letting the money sit in a low-interest savings account, while I simply tried to navigate the crushing silence of my grief. But one sleepless night, I found his old work ledgers tucked away in his office. Running my hand over his precise, elegant handwriting, I felt a spark of his old passion. I started reading. I devoured books on investing from the library, spent hours watching financial tutorials online, and even enrolled in a community college course on market fundamentals. It was Arthur's voice in my head reminding me that I was smarter than I gave myself credit for. 6 years ago, my hands trembling, I made my first move. I transferred $80,000 into a mix of index funds and blue-chip dividend stocks, terrified I was gambling away my security. But a strange thing happened. The market was kind, and that nest egg didn't just last, it grew. It grew with a speed that felt like magic. Within a year, my initial investment had ballooned, and my total portfolio was nearing $300,000. I had made gains I never thought possible. That's when my daughter Clara called me, her voice thick with tears. She had been struggling since her divorce, working a demanding marketing job that barely covered the bills for her and Sophie. "Mom, I don't know what to do," she sobbed. Sophie got into Oak Haven Preparatory Academy. It's her dream school, but the tuition is $25,000 a year. I can't make it happen. I feel like such a failure. I looked at the numbers on my brokerage account app, a site that was quickly becoming my secret obsession. The number stared back $285,000. "Don't worry, darling," I said, my voice steady. "I'll take care of Sophie's education." Clara was stunned. "Mom, no. I can't let you drain your inheritance for this. Dad worked so hard for that money." What she couldn't possibly understand was that the portfolio wasn't draining. It was thriving. While she pictured me pinching pennies and sacrificing my future for Sophie's, I was quietly becoming a formidable investor. And in that moment, I made a second decision. I let her believe it was a sacrifice. I wanted them to appreciate it. I never imagined that my well-intentioned secret would one day become the foundation for their entitlement and ultimately my own humiliation. That first year of tuition was just the beginning. Soon, my financial support became the invisible scaffolding holding up their entire lives. It started small, $200 a month for Sophie's car insurance, $400 for a new wardrobe so she wouldn't feel out of place, another $300 for a math tutor when her grades slipped. Each request was met with a quiet transfer from my brokerage account. Clara would thank me profusely, her voice always laced with a performative guilt. "Mom, I feel so awful. You're stretching your pension to the absolute limit for us. We'll pay you back one day, I swear." If only she knew. While she was imagining me eating canned soup to afford Sophie's designer jeans, my portfolio was exploding. By year 3, it hit $450,000. By the time Sophie was turning 16, I was managing a portfolio worth over $850,000, generating more than $60,000 a year in capital gains and dividends alone, more than Clara's own salary. I continued to live in my same small apartment, drive my 10-year-old Toyota, and shop at consignment stores. Not out of necessity, but because every dollar I saved was a dollar I could invest for our family's future. Sometimes Clara would see me checking stock prices on my phone, and she'd pat my hand condescendingly. "I'm so glad you have your little stock market hobby, Mom. It's important to keep your mind busy at your age." My little hobby. That hobby was the only reason her daughter had a fully funded 529 college savings plan, which I'd opened in secret 4 years ago, and now held over $60,000. The real turning point, the first crack in my heart, came 3 months before the Sweet 16 party. Oak Haven Prep held an annual Parents' Art Gala to raise money for their arts program. I spent weeks knitting a beautiful cashmere scarf in a deep sapphire blue, using the last of the yarn Arthur had bought me on our final trip to the coast. I was so proud imagining it on the auction table. When I arrived, however, I saw Sophie's face fall. Her eyes darted from my lovingly made scarf to the other items: a signed lithograph, a weekend stay at a Napa vineyard, a designer handbag. A few minutes later, while I was getting a glass of water, I saw her do it. She sidled up to the table, glanced around to make sure no one was watching, and slid my scarf off the display, tucking it beneath the tablecloth. When I later asked her where it went, she just shrugged. "I don't know, Grandma. Maybe it fell." Later that night, Clara called. "Mom, Sophie told me about the scarf. You have to understand, at a school like Oak Haven Prep, appearances are everything. A homemade item. It just looked a little out of place. Out of place. Just like me. I should have seen the party for what it would be then. It wasn't an isolated incident, it was a dress rehearsal." Despite the incident with the scarf, a foolish part of me held on to hope for the party. I thought if I could give Sophie this one perfect, magical night, the kind all her wealthy friends had, it would remind her of how much I loved her. I thought this grand gesture could somehow buy back her affection. I oversaw every detail myself, channeling my grief and loneliness into the planning. The final bill was just over $15,000. I hired the city's top DJ, arranged for a custom ice sculpture of her initials, and approved a menu with a seafood raw bar that cost a small fortune. The morning of the party, I was at the hotel ballroom at dawn, ensuring the placement of every gold, rim charger, and the fullness of every floral arrangement. When I arrived that evening, I parked my Toyota at the far end of the lot, a little gray sparrow in a sea of gleaming eagles, BMWs, Audis, and Teslas. I had chosen my outfit with care, a simple dark navy dress of heavy silk that Arthur had bought me for our 30th anniversary. It was timeless and elegant, or so I believed. Sophie was a vision. The pale pink gown I'd paid $500 for looked like it was made for her. When I walked up to embrace her, her arms came around me for a fleeting, papery hug. "Happy birthday, my darling," I whispered. "Thanks, Grandma," she said, her eyes already scanning the room for her friends. It was the first of many small cuts that night. I tried to mingle, but the other grandparents, draped in designer labels and clinking heavy jewelry, spoke a language of ski chalets and stock options I couldn't join. I saw Sophie's friends looking at me. One of them, Madison, leaned over to another and whispered something. I didn't hear it all, but I caught the phrase, "Is she one of the caterers?" My cheeks burned. I busied myself helping the actual staff, pointing out where to set up the dessert buffet, ensuring the DJ had Sophie's playlist queued up. I was trying to be useful, to feel like I belonged in the fantasy I had built. The final blow came an hour later. Sophie and her circle were laughing by the elaborate photo booth I'd insisted on. I approached them, my heart doing a nervous flutter, holding 2 glasses of sparkling cider. "Having fun, girls?" I asked with a warm smile. The laughter stopped. Every eye turned to me. I saw a flicker of sheer panic on Sophie's face as she took in my simple dress, my sensible shoes, my very presence. She looked at Madison, then back at me. Without a word, she gently took her friends by the elbow. "Come on," she said, her voice bright and false. "Let's go get a picture before the line gets long." And she turned, guiding them away, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the polished dance floor, with 2 drinks in my hands, an island of irrelevance in an ocean of my own making. I set the 2 glasses of cider down on a vacant table, my movements calm and deliberate. I walked through that grand ballroom, past the ice sculpture that was beginning to weep under the warm lights, past the dance floor filled with laughing teenagers, past my daughter Clara, who was blissfully unaware, deep in conversation with another parent. Not a single person noticed me leave. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the music, but I could still feel the vibrations through the floor. My party went on without me. I sat in my Toyota for a long time, the engine off, listening to the faint thumping of the bass. The tears came then, hot and silent, blurring the glittering lights of the luxury cars around me. It was a grief so profound it felt like a death. In a way it was. The death of the loving, doting grandmother I had tried so hard to be. The death of the illusion that my generosity had earned me anything more than the right to be their private bank. But as the minutes ticked by, the tears dried up. The hollow ache in my chest began to fill with something hard and cold, like ice forming on a winter lake. It was anger. A quiet, clarifying anger that burned away all the hurt and left behind a core of pure, unadulterated resolve. I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, but I didn't go home. I drove 2 blocks and pulled over onto a dark, quiet street. I clicked on the dome light, opened my glove compartment, and took out a cheap ballpoint pen and a slightly crumpled napkin. On that flimsy piece of paper, my hand perfectly steady, I began to write. Oak Haven Prep tuition, 3 years, $75,000. Honda Civic payments, 18 MOs, Father $400. Wardrobe and incidentals este, $12,000. Sweet 16 party, $15,000. I added a few other major expenses: the emergency roof repair for Clara's house, the class trip to Europe. The total at the bottom was well over $100,000, not even including the secret college fund. I stared at the numbers written in my own hand. It wasn't a list of gifts. It was a ledger of disrespect. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that it was time to close the account. I didn't sleep that weekend. I spent my time in quiet preparation, reviewing my financial statements and organizing my thoughts. At 9:00 a.m. sharp on Monday morning, I called my financial advisor, Mr. Davies. "Good morning, Charles," I said, my voice even and clear. "It's Eleanor Vance. I need to schedule an urgent meeting. I'll be making significant changes to my portfolio's distribution strategy." The surprise in his voice was palpable. We met in his quiet, wood-paneled office an hour later. Mr. Davies was a kind man in his late 50s who had always treated me with a gentle, almost paternal respect, impressed by how I'd grown my late husband's legacy. "Eleanor," he began, steepling his fingers. "You sounded quite resolute on the phone. Is everything all right?" I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I simply recounted the events of Saturday night in a calm, factual tone, ending with the image of me standing alone on the dance floor. My granddaughter has made it clear that my financial support is welcome, but my presence is an embarrassment, I concluded. I have decided to honor her wishes and remove my embarrassing presence from her life in all its forms. He listened intently, his expression shifting from concern to grim understanding. I see, he said softly. What would you like to do? I slid the crumpled napkin across his polished desk. This is where we begin. For the next 30 minutes, I issued a series of directives, my voice never wavering. First, please access the custodial 529 account for Sophie Vance's account number ending in 45B1. Suspend all future automatic monthly deposits of $1,000 effective immediately. He typed a quiet click-clacking in the silent room. Done. Second, I want you to draft a letter to the financing division of Honda. I will be initiating the process to have my name removed as the co-signer on the loan for a 2023 Civic VIN number. Third, and this is the most critical, you are to place an immediate stop on the automatic quarterly tuition payment of $6,250 to Oak Haven Preparatory Academy. The next payment is due in 1 week. Mr. Davies stopped typing and looked at me over his spectacles. Eleanor, to be clear, this will detonate a financial bomb in their lives. The car will be repossessed. The school will expel her. They've built their entire budget around your support. I met his gaze without flinching. For 6 years, Charles Bates have allowed my love to be mistaken for an entitlement. I am not taking away their money. I am taking back my self-respect. Please proceed. For a week, an unnerving silence hung in the air. Sophie texted twice. Once for $200 for concert tickets, once for $350 for a pair of boots everyone had. For the first time in 6 years, my reply to both was the same. No, sweetheart. That's something you should discuss with your mother. I could practically feel her baffled indignation through the phone. Then on Tuesday of the second week, the first tremor hit. Clara called me, her voice tight with anxiety. Mom, I just got a bizarre call from the auto finance company. They said you've been removed as the co-signer and that I'm now solely responsible for the payments. It has to be a mistake, right? There's no mistake, Clara, I said calmly, pruning a rosebush on my small balcony. It's Sophie's car, so it's your family's responsibility. But I can't afford an extra $300 a month. We had an agreement. Agreements can be reassessed, I replied, snipping off a dead leaf. The real earthquake struck on Friday. I knew it had happened when my phone rang, and Clara's voice was a choked, hysterical sob. First, the school had called her. The tuition payment due that day had been declined. She had an hour-long, humiliating conversation with the bursar, who informed her that if the $6,250 was not paid by Monday, Sophie would be unenrolled. But that wasn't the worst of it. While Clara was still reeling from that call, Sophie had called her from school, screaming and crying. A tow truck had arrived at Oak Haven Preparatory Academy during lunch hour. In front of the entire student body, in front of Madison and her whole circle, the driver had calmly hooked up Sophie's pristine Honda Civic. She had been forced to walk out, hand over the keys, and watch her status symbol be hauled out of the pristine parking lot like a piece of trash. The public humiliation was exquisite in its symmetry. The final blow landed on Saturday. Clara, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy, went to do her weekly grocery shopping. She stood at the checkout, a cart piled high, and her primary credit card was declined. Then the second one. The cashier looked at her with pity as she was forced to abandon the full cart. She called me from the grocery store parking lot, her voice stripped of all its previous anger, leaving only a raw, terrified bewilderment. Mom, my cards aren't working. The limits have been slashed to almost nothing. I can't even buy food. What is happening? What did you do? It was time for them to see the ledger. They came to my apartment that evening. Clara's face was pale and drawn, her eyes red-rimmed. Sophie trailed behind her, looking smaller and younger than she had in her party dress. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom, please, Clara began, her voice cracking. You have to stop this. We're ruined. Whatever we did, we're sorry. Just make it stop. I didn't speak. I simply walked over to my desk, and picked up a thick folder Mr. Davies had prepared for me. I placed it on the coffee table in front of them. "This," I said quietly, "is the ledger." Clara opened it. The first page was a summary statement of my investment portfolio. Her eyes scanned the page, then widened in disbelief. She pointed a trembling finger at the bottom line. "What? What is this number?" "That's the current value of my little hobby," I said. $853,421.78. Dead silence. Sophie finally looked up, her jaw slack. "But your car?" Clara stammered. "This apartment, the thrift store clothes. I thought you were sacrificing everything for us." "That was a choice, Clara," I said, my voice soft but firm. "A choice I made out of love. I chose to live simply so that you and Sophie could live extravagantly. You mistook my choice for your entitlement. You saw me as poor and embarrassing because I wasn't wearing the wealth that was funding your entire life." Sophie finally broke. A gut-wrenching sob escaped her lips. "Grandma," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. I was so stupid and horrible. I'm so sorry." I looked at my granddaughter, truly looked at her, and for the first time in a long time I saw a flicker of the sweet girl I remembered. "I accept your apology, Sophie. But sorry doesn't fix this. Our relationship from now on will be very different." I explained that the college fund still existed, but access to it was no longer a guarantee. It had to be earned. She would need to present me with a one-year plan, detailing how she would get a part-time job, contribute to her own expenses, and demonstrate consistent respect and gratitude. "Our relationship," I said, looking at them both, "will be based on love, not financial dependency. The bank of Grandma is permanently closed." 3 months later, Sophie was working 20 hours a week at a local coffee shop. She had to sell her designer clothes to help Clara make rent. Her texts to me were no longer requests, but little stories about her day, or questions about my own. For my birthday, she brought me a single perfect orchid bought with money she had earned herself. It meant more to me than the entire $15,000 party. As for me, I was finally living. I sold my old Toyota and bought a comfortable new Lexus. I moved into a beautiful condo with a view of the Oak Haven Hills. Last night, I sat on my new leather sofa, opened my laptop, and booked a first-class non-stop ticket to Florence, Italy. A dream I had put on hold for 7 years. I learned you can't buy respect, you can only command it. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to teach them in no uncertain terms your true worth. If you have ever felt taken for granted or had to fight for the dignity you deserve, please share your story in the comments below. You are not alone. Remember to like this video and subscribe for more stories about finding your strength when you need it most.